I want to acknowledge some various sources that helped me develop this sermon. The HuffPost in May 7th, 2015, the Unitarian Universalist World magazine, Lev Lafayette's blog and address to the Melbourne Unitarian Peace Memorial Church on Sunday, February 19th, 2006, the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum article last edited in March 8th, 2024, and of course our friend Wikipedia, who always helps to keep me honest. What I thought about this Sunday, and this was not an easy process for me to understand a little bit of what's going on and understand it from a perspective of our own spirituality. Why do we get so upset when we watch the news? When we see legal immigrants and refugees being turned into illegal residents from one day to the next, rights of the LGBT community being dismantled, women's rights to make their own medical decisions being taken away, banks, law firms, and corporations turning away from the diversity, equity, and inclusion programs that made them the great institutions they are today. Why do we get angst while others seem to sleep soundly? I think that for us, being Unitarian Universalists is a big part of the problem. I'm kidding. But in fact, brains are wired differently. And even though, as Unitarian Universalists, we are a very diverse group of individuals, we have some similar wiring. As we grow through our ethical and spiritual journey, we change over time. We might move from one religion to another, might drop a religion, might drop religiosity altogether. We move from one ethos to another of our work and our corporate life, our family life. But as we grow in our spiritual and ethical journey, we do change over time, but the wiring, our spiritual and ethical DNA, continues to inform those decisions and those changes. It aligns with the fact that we're here today in this room. We have a rich history that can inform us about our roots, our DNA toward justice, our heritage to refuse to blindly accept authority, our willingness to speak truth when the powerful lie, and our fight for human rights when rulers try to take those rights away. Let me just say that DNA doesn't always work out in our favor. Our DNA can be tough, going against the mainstream. But I would say that after almost 2,000 years of being a heretical faith, demanding inclusivity, human rights, freedom to believe, and a democratic process, we're still here. And that does say something for our spirituality. So I want to look at some examples of the spiritual DNA in our faith. Each one of these could be a whole sermon. But we're going to go back to the 1500s when the New World was being born, a modern world where the secular state was becoming ascendant over theological empires. I have a picture here, I think. Yes, Hungarian Francis David. Okay, so he trained to be a Catholic priest. He joined the Reformation with the Lutherans. When they split, he joined the Calvinists, and then he decided that Jesus was human and started the Unitarian movement. How do you think that goes for you? Well, he had a little bit of luck in that he was the bishop in the chief city in Transylvania and was the king's assistant for religion. So, when he rejected the dogma of the Trinity on his sermon on January 20th, 1566, the king, Sigismund, I don't know if we have a picture of him or not. Yeah, there he is. Yeah. His dad died when he was very young. In fact, he was born, and his dad, so his mom was the queen, and then passed it over to him when he became a young king at 18. Well, when he heard the sermon, he decided to have 3 debates with Catholics, Lutherans, and Calvinists, and the new anti-Trinitarians present. Although the first debate wasn't exactly conclusive, what it said to the king was people should have religious freedom. Now, we're talking about the remnants of the Roman Empire, fighting between the Lutherans and the Catholics, right? So the idea of religious freedom was not known at the time in any nation in Europe. And he issued the first religious freedom doctrine, the Edict of Torda. It was the first expression of religious freedom in modern Christian states. Now, because Francis David was the chief bishop, the king actually converted to what was called the Transylvanian Ecclesia of One Accord, which was the beginning of the Unitarians in Hungary. And almost the entire city converted, and some 500 congregations throughout the Principality of Transylvania converted in subsequent months. And the idea was the community could vote whoever they wanted to be their minister. And they also could not persecute someone who believed differently than them. Now, as you can imagine, this was not very much appreciated by others. And so it was short-lived. After King Sigismund died in 1571, his replacement from Poland had little time for heresy or religious freedom, preferring to be part of the papacy in Rome. And Francis David was tried as an innovator and died in prison in 1579. It is said that a poem was found scrawled in his cell with these final lines: "Nor lightning, nor cross, nor sword of the Pope, nor death's visible face, no power whatsoever can stay the progress of truth. Whatever I felt I have written with faithful heart, I have spoken. After my death, the dogmas of untruth shall fall." Sounds like a pretty Unitarian statement. Believed in his truths and knew that the truths of the powerful were not true. Well, it took about 200 years later before the Hungarian church again allowed an edict on religious freedom. And the Hungarian Universalists, Unitarians have survived in Hungary, and particularly Transylvania, and we had a sister church here, and a member that actually lived with this sister church in Bozad. So I think the idea of this Edict of Torda is that if other European countries had bought into that, it could have saved thousands of lives that were lost through religious conflict. It would have led to a political distinction between state and ethnicity, where people of different languages, appearance, and culture could have lived alongside each other in the same independent states. That didn't happen. Instead, there was a brief and troubling flowering of freedom in a distant and isolated corner of Europe that was quickly crushed by those who saw the opportunity to extend their power and control over people. But it provided a seed of the idea of national unity built on the principles of freedom and reason rather than ethnicity and religious differences. Both the American and the French revolutions followed this, and they remain core principles in how we judge whether a society is modern, secular, and democratic, including our own society today. The Unitarian DNA is alive and well in our discussions. So, Michael Cervantes, he was born in Spain around the same time, 1511. We're more certain of his death date because he was burned at the stake on October 27th, 1553 in Champel, Switzerland. Cervantes was a Spanish physician and theologian whose unorthodox teachings, including that Jesus was a human, was condemned as a heretic both by Protestant and Catholics. So Calvin declared that if Cervantes ever came to Geneva, he would not allow him to leave alive. Cervantes felt like the governments and the churches needed to be separate, and that religions, particularly Christian religion, needed to go back to its roots, and that had been taken over by Roman conclaves at the time that had made theological decisions that weren't biblically based. Well, he was first arrested by the Catholic Inquisitor during the Spanish Inquisition. He was arrested in Leon, and during the trial he escaped, so the Catholic authorities had to be content with burning him in effigy. Well, he went to Geneva, was arrested, and tried for heresy by the Calvinists. Calvin himself played a prominent role in the trial and pressed for execution, although by beheading instead of fire. But he was burned alive. So, as a Unitarian, believing differently, his death marked a profound reckoning, because he didn't call himself a Unitarian at the time. That verbiage came later. But he influenced the father of modern Unitarian views, Socinus, and it was his influence that also changed both Protestant and Catholics in terms of the controversy on imposing the death penalty for heresy, and both got rid of that. Calvin himself was severely criticized, and he was the last person to be burned at the stake. Go figure. A kind of Unitarian guy. So far, not so good for us, right? No, the influence is what's good. We jump to this century, and before I do that, I think I have a picture of Susan B. Anthony. We did the play on Susan B. Anthony. Susan B. Anthony fought her whole life for something that didn't happen during her lifetime, right? The right for women to vote. She fought for that. She had arguments with others, and fighting for that right was her whole life. That's what she did. But not just for the right to vote, for the rights of women to have equal rights, to be able to divorce, to be able to have property, to be able to not be abused. If you remember that New York State had laws against animal abuse before they had laws against child abuse and spousal abuse. So I bring her up because we're still fighting for those rights, and to know that rights received can be rights taken away. It's never a battle that ends. In the video, we talked about Martha and Waitzel Sharp. They helped thousands of people escape from persecution and death. If you remember your history, and this is not a history lesson, but Czechoslovakia was divided. The Germans demanded a certain part. Sudetenland, which was a part where there was a high number of Germans that had been taken away from Germany after World War I. And Britain and France agreed that they could take that as long as they didn't declare war. And they did. And so this is when the Waitzels, who, again, was motivated by their faith. Waitzel Sharp graduated from Harvard Law School and Divinity School before ordination as a Unitarian minister. And Martha Ingham Dickey Sharp studied social work at Northwestern University in Chicago, and she trained at John Adams' famous Hull House settlement. With two small children, they answered the call, and they went to the free part of Czechoslovakia. Unfortunately, less than a month after they arrived, the Nazis invaded and occupied Czechoslovakia. The next 6 months they had to tell people they actually were not part of the U.S. property. People were coming to try to get freedom, and they said, we're just two people. But they helped out with relief work and immigration assistance. On one occasion, Martha escorted 35 refugees, political leaders, journalists, and orphan children to England. She concealed their identities from Nazi authorities, and she also cooperated with British organizations to gather children for so-called kinder transports, and was a model replicated by many others in Europe. Wetzel was out of the country in 1939 and not permitted to come back in, and Martha narrowly escaped from the Gestapo, and they sailed for the United States. But they moved back to Portugal, and they kept doing refugee services from Portugal. Now, the important thing of this is the Unitarian mission, which is the Unitarian Service Committee, was formed by them and two others, which is still at the forefront of international justice today, representing Unitarian Universalist Association around the world. So their work led to that. Our spiritual DNA has been embedded in the civil rights movement. One publication, I think we have a picture of a couple of our members that passed away during the civil rights movement. One publication referred to them as just 4 of the thousands of Americans who came to Selma, heeding the call of Reverend Martin Luther King. 4 people of conscience to join in protesting the plight of African Americans in Alabama at the height of the civil rights movement. A Baptist deacon, a Unitarian minister, a Unitarian laywoman, and an Episcopal seminarian, all largely unknown for sacrificing their lives for the rights of others. The minister, James Reeb, let's go back a picture there, Crystal. Sorry. James Reeb was having dinner with Reverend Clark Olson, who recalled 4 men came at us from across the street in Selma. One of them was carrying a club and hit Jim's head. They had all been in Selma to work on the march. 38-year-old father of 4 was taken to the Birmingham hospital and died 2 years later. It wasn't the first time he was working to improve the lives of others. He had a job with the Quaker organization in Boston to help on housing issues, particularly among African Americans who were discriminated against in Boston. Olson said he was just a very committed person this way and wanted to do good in the world and right some of the wrongs of our society. Martin Luther King preached at his eulogy, and hours later, Lyndon Johnson mentioned his death when he asked Congress to introduce the Voting Rights Act. 3 men were charged in his death, and all were acquitted. But his message resonated all the way to the President of the United States. Unitarian laywoman Viola Liuzzo, don't know if we have a picture. Okay. She was also murdered. Her affiliation with the Unitarians did influence her decision to drive south, her daughter said, Sally, of her mother's trek from Detroit. However, even if she was not involved in any church, she would have gone anyway. That's who she was. She loved her country, she loved her Unitarian church, and she knew segregation was not right. She wanted a better world for her children. So a mother of 5, she was driving from Selma to go to Montgomery, taking another person who was part of the marches, who was black, and was killed by a Ku Klux Klansman for having a white woman and a black man in the car. Right here in Northeast Florida, we have many members who fought against oppression. We did a sermon recently on Ike Williams, Clarence Sears, who was a member of our church who infiltrated the KKK in Northeast Florida, and of course Reverend Charles McGehee, who participated as the only white, there's Clarence Sears, and Reverend McGehee, who participated locally as the only white clergyman in a March for Jobs and Freedom, and also marched in Selma. We'll have separate sermons on them later. All this history, is it fascinating? Yes. Inspiring? Different times, but similar patterns. Yes. What does it teach us? What's the common thread? I think the common thread is that we have a very good, healthy DNA for justice, inclusion, and democracy. Our spiritual DNA, this is what our core is, speaks to the worth and dignity of all humans. Not everybody believes that. Our interconnectedness, not everyone accepts that. And our thirst for freedom, not everybody wants that. We listen to our inner voice and take action. Our DNA is sometimes tenuous, often out of the mainstream. We don't always agree with each other. We are persecuted by our beliefs because often the majority if you understand levels of development, and not that one is good or bad, but often the majority in our country is very black and white, very tribal, which means they don't necessarily question authority that calls for homogeneity, that doesn't allow for differences, and that ostracizes those that go against the mainstream. This is a prevailing DNA, and we confront that. So during our Sundays together, we'll continue to take in all this history of our spirituality and apply it to where we are today and what we can do in our current environment to continue to use our spiritual DNA, to understand that it's part of us. So don't fret. Don't lose too much sleep. Get sleep. It's actually better for you for the next day. Don't take my word for it. Take my word for it. Don't always do it well. But it's in our DNA to be concerned. It's also in our DNA to be rational, focused, and disciplined in our fight for justice. We can influence what we can control. Next week, Jawad's going to be talking about his experience coming from Afghanistan, and he was a translator, Afghanistan to the United States. It was a long, arduous process. We're taking a collection for our work with refugees and immigrants. We're doing that because that's something we can control, what we can do. What can we change, and who can we partner with to leverage our voice? iCare is an example. We partner with others who may not be the same exact spirituality, but have a DNA in their spirituality similar to ours. So listen to your inner voice in quiet and stillness. Let your inner voice within you speak from the ancient wisdom that goes back millennia in our heretical history. And let you be led by that spirit. Thank you.